Our custom virtual server will be listening on HTTP, and we know that will involve several HTTP requests between the client and our big IP. So those requests will consist of an HTTP header followed by some HTTP content. So in terms of the header, it will look something like this. So here we're using a plugin that is called Live HTTP Headers, and this allows us to look inside of the header of each message that is sent and received for a site, in particular our web server farm. If you are using an HTTP application, then you will definitely be using a tool like this to help set up your iRules scripts. Now all of this, specifically this section right here, exists inside of an HTTP GET request. And this would be considered as our event. The condition of what we want to match, the query command, may be something like host or user agent, which reflects the web browser that we are using. So our first script will be based on the web browser that our client is using. Therefore, the condition value will be user agent. And this will list browser details, and we can reference any text within this string for a specific element that we want to match. So for example, we can include the text Mozilla if we want to match Firefox web browsers. But Internet Explorer by Microsoft, that also uses Mozilla as its user agent. So maybe we can use the text that we see at the very end called Firefox to match a Firefox web browser condition. So let's go ahead and apply this to an actual script. So in our first script, we want to check the web browser that the client may be using and forwarding them to a specific server pool that may handle certain browser traffic better. Therefore, if any client accessing our web farm uses a Firefox web browser, they should be redirected to web server 1, to that particular pool that's configured. But if the user is using any other browser, they should be redirected to web server 2. And we have set up a domain name of browser.routehub.local, which is mapped to the virtual server address. So that's what we'll be using on the actual client. Therefore, let's bring up a text editor to begin our scripting. And now let's set up the script. So we'll first put in a unique name for this script. Okay, something simple like IR for iRules web browser. Again, it can be any name that you want. And don't forget to include the starting brace and then the ending curly brackets. This will group everything that we'll set up together. Otherwise, it won't know where to start or to end. All right, next we need to specify what event will trigger the rule that we are creating. And this will happen for each HTTP request that hits this virtual server. So that code would be the following. We'll say when HTTP request, that is the actual event name that we saw on the Dev Central page. And we'll go ahead and do a curly bracket and end it off here as well. Let's put this down here. Okay, now for the condition, we will list two conditions. One will check if the client is using Firefox, and the second condition will be a default if the first condition isn't met. So for the first condition, we will say something like look within, we'll say an if, and we'll say HTTP, which is basically looking at the actual header, and we'll look at the user agent field. Okay, if it contains the text Firefox, then it will perform the following action. Oops. Okay. Okay, and that particular action will be sent to our pool, and the pool name exactly is pool W1. Okay. Otherwise, which is else, we're going to send the client to pool W2, which has our second web server. Okay. Again, the exact code syntax that we use can be referenced on the Dev Central page. So once again, our event was HTTP requests. Great. Now for the conditions, let's go down here, and we selected HTTP header, and this will do a query or modify the HTTP header. So that is the exact syntax that we use. We use the operation of contains, and we specify a custom particular field that we want to search, which is looking for the exact words of Firefox within the user agent field. Okay, let's go ahead and clean this up a little bit. Let's close this up there. And with that completed, we will copy everything within the name itself. So just this part right here, because remember, we do not need to include the name since that will be set up statically through the Big IP web UI. So let's go ahead and copy and paste that. Next, we need to go to the iRules page. So that's right here under local traffic. And this will list a few default iRules. We will create a new rule. And we'll first enter the name that we wanted based on our code, which was IR web browser. Okay. And then we will paste our code into this text field as a iRule definition. And let's finish to add this rule. Next, we need to apply this to our virtual server. So let's go back to our virtual server. Let's go to our custom. And let's first apply the HTTP profile in order for our Big IP to learn how to inspect HTTP headers in the client request. And let's go ahead and update our changes. Okay, now let's go to the resources tab. And here under iRules, we'll go to Manage, and we will enable our custom script. And then we'll say Finished. For testing, once again, we have set up a local domain within our host file called browser.routhub.local, which is mapping to the IP of the virtual server. So this domain name itself is configured as the default site in all of our web browsers. So let's first open up Firefox to access that site and confirm that we are connected to web server 1 based on our script. Okay, and we are connected to server 1, which means that it is matching the first condition, the if statement that we set up. Now let's open up Microsoft Internet Explorer to access that site. Great, and here we are connected to web server 2, matching the second condition that we set up within our iRule script. We can monitor those pools the same way as the other pools that we've set up in our previous videos. So let's go to pools here, and this will list all of our pools, and there we will see activity for web server 1, that particular pool, which is basically redirect us based on our Firefox web browser. And when we're using our Internet Explorer browser, then 77 connections were sent to web server 2. So once again, this reflects that we did have traffic activity and how we can monitor that. Now let's add more to our existing iRule script to show other things that we can do. Okay, let's go there. So as a recap, when our Big IP for our custom virtual server receives an HTTP request, it will look within the HTTP header and look at the user agent field. So if the user agent field contains any text that says Firefox, it will redirect the client to web server 1. Or, which is represented as the else statement right here, redirect the client to web server 2. And this is what we tested. But let's bring back our slide again. But let's say that we want to add additional conditions that we might want to match. Let's say that if the client is using a Google Chrome web browser, that we want to redirect them to web server 3, to the web server 3 pool. Therefore, we need to add another if statement. So this is what we want to now include in our updated script. That if you're using Firefox, you're still going to web server 1. If you're using Safari, Internet Explorer, that will be sent to web server 2. But if you're using Chrome, you should be sent to web server 3. So let's go ahead and copy this existing if condition group. Okay, and let's go ahead and paste it below this particular code. Now for additional if statements that you want to add, we need to use the syntax that is called else if. Okay, and we can add multiple else ifs that we may have matching other conditions. Now for the user agent text condition, we will put in Chrome instead of Firefox. Then we will specify the action to use, and that will be pull W3, which has web server 3. And let's go ahead and update our changes once we're done. So when you're working with if and else statements, which is very common in all coding, these are seen as a rule which will work from the top down until it finds a match. So this is very similar to a Cisco ACL or a firewall policy. So within this script, it will first check if the client is using a Firefox web browser. If there is no match to this particular condition right here, then it will check the first else if condition, because you could have many conditions listed here. And that condition will check if the client is using a Chrome web browser. If there is no match to this particular condition, then it will use the default condition, which is our else statement condition, redirecting the client to web server 2. So it's recommended to include a default or a catch-all condition in any script. Otherwise, an error would be generated, and the client will not be able to access any site beyond the big IP. For testing, let's launch our 3 web browsers and access our site to confirm that everything is working. So let's open up Firefox. Okay, and that redirects us to web server 1, which is correct based on our coding. Now let's open up Microsoft Internet Explorer. Okay, great, and that redirects us to web server 2, which is working as expected. And let's bring up our Chrome browser. So here we'll go ahead and we will type in our custom, or type in the domain of our custom virtual server. Okay, and that will redirect us to web server 3, which is also correct. So our iRules script for checking the client's web browser and sending them to a different server pool is indeed working. So that's how you can use that script within your environment.